This week we are going to look at making nicer formatted tables and how to create some bar charts, interactive bar charts using this Plotly library. All right. So I'm going to go quickly through this first part. It's a review of what we've been doing. First thing, we load our libraries. The key thing to note here on line 9 is we're loading this library called Plotly, or we're going to use specifically Plotly Express, and we're calling that PX. So we're going to alias that to be PX, right? I load my census key and I create a census object because I only need to do that one time. I'm just going to use it every time I need to. Here I look up some variables from our map tool census vars, and I'm looking for vehicle. So what we're going to look at today is this tenure by vehicle. This is table B25044, and it tells us how many cars are in a household, and it breaks them down by owner and renter, right? So when I get the field names, I display them down here. I convert the variable names to field names. That's what get table does for us. And I can see it tells us how many households there are, how many are owner occupied, how many are renter occupied, and then whether they have 0 vehicles up to 5 or more vehicles, right? So these are the breaks, the categories that we have from the census data, right? So what I did was I ran this, I copied the output, and then I pasted it back in here. And then I just updated the names to make them a little bit shorter. So owner occupied no vehicle, I just said owner no vehicle, right? Just to make it a little bit easier to read. And then in the next block, what we've been doing, I get the fields as a list. I call the ACS 5 survey. I'm going to get that 5-year survey from 2022. I'm going to get it for all the counties in New York State. So here I'm using that US package to get the FIPS code for New York. And again, this is just review. When we do a census get call, we use our census object that's already been instantiated with our API. We say what fields we want to look up. And the fields are these, like the actual variable names. So I'm passing them in. And then the geo, we say for at the county level, every county. And then in is like the filter in New York State, right? So now I have all the counties in New York State. I rename the state to be the postal abbreviation and the state code to be state FP for FIPS. And we just take a look at it, right? So this is our data unsorted. And if we scroll to the end, we see we have the county here as the county FIPS code, right? Once we have our data, I'm going to calculate a couple common columns. I create car free just by adding together the owner car free and the renter car free, and then I create a percent, and then I just use that to calculate the number of car owner households from the total households so that I have that data. And again, here we have it where we have our new columns here, right? County numbers aren't that useful. So again, I'm going to review a little bit of our merging that we've done. We're not making any maps, no maps in this tutorial, but what we are going to do is bring in the county shapefile because that has the county names in it. There might be another way to another data set to look this up, but this one works great because it's already joined. It's meant to go with our census data. So I just copied and pasted this URL from the Tigerline FTP website. I read the counties. Now this is all the counties in the United States. So the first thing I do is run a little filter so I get just the New York counties. By seeing the county state FP column matches the FIPS code for New York, right? That's line 3. Then I rename county FP to county, and I rename the name to be county name, right? So that when I merge them, I can just do it on county. Otherwise, I could do left on and right on. But if I rename county FP to match the county column up here, I don't need to do that. I can just use on, right? And now I get my new table, which has the New York State counties and the number of households, right? But now I know the actual name: Albany County, Bronx County, Broome County, and so on. These are alphabetical. Here is the new-ish stuff. We are going to use the style function and the styler object that's part of GeoPandas, not part of, well, it's part of Pandas, it's part of DataFrame. And we're going to use that to make a nicely formatted display without changing the underlying data, right? So I've got cars, and you can see this is the raw data we have in here. Our numbers are all floats. Our percentages are real numbers between 0 and 1. I'm going to use the style object to format it, right? So the first thing I do is I say which columns I want to format using a string formatter. So I'm going to do total households, car free percent, and car owner percent, right? So for total households, I'm going to separate it by commas. And for car free, I'm going to use commas and format it as a percent to 1 decimal place, right? All right. I create a title, put a little bit of HTML. This is a level 3 header. And then I sort the values. So cars is our data frame, and I sort it by the percent car free descending. I create a list with the columns I want to actually show in my output. I don't want to show all the columns. I just want to show the ones that I want to look at for this table. And here on line 10, I get just the top 10 because I call head on cars. And then I get the style object and I format it, right? So when I format it, I get a table, which is Pandas styler object. And that lets me set a caption. This is something new. So I just set a caption right in the table itself, right? And I display the table, and here we go. So now I have these nicely formatted columns, right, with commas, percent sign. They look the way I want. And cars hasn't been changed. I haven't changed any of the data in cars. It still looks the way I want, all right? Now, one thing I can't do with the styler object is actually change the column names. But I like these names because they make it easier to do calculations, right? And to do filters and things. So I like the variable style names because they're easier for me to remember. They're easy to work with using dot notation, which I'm not doing here. But they're nice to work with when we're manipulating the data. They're not nice for display because they're not as human readable. So here we go. Down here, we're going to make a copy of our data just for display purposes. So I create another dictionary, and these have aliases for my column names to pretty names or human readable names. So what I do is I get only the columns I want, so only the ones that I have aliases for. I'm going to get them. Calling keys gives me just the left side of this dictionary, right? We've done it for fields. We're doing it again here to get a subset of columns. And I get the top 10, and then I make a copy of it. So now table is actually a real data frame. I rename the columns, right? And then I'm going to switch it. I'm going to switch it back to a styler so I can apply the formats and set the function. And just to get this to work, I can't reuse these formats, unfortunately, because I've changed my column names. So I'm going to take this, but they need to actually match the new names, or else they won't be able to format it. County doesn't need any formatting, it's just a string, but these guys do. Car free and car owner get the same format. All right, so when we run that, we're going to get um, this nicely formatted output, right? So I ran it with the old formats. It didn't find anything. Now we get it where we can see New York County is 77.9% car free. This is Manhattan, and very low car ownership overall for people living in Manhattan. Bronx and Kings County is Brooklyn, right? So here I showed you two ways to make a nicely formatted table. The first one is quickly to just use a styler object, right? So we call style, we can format it, and we can set a caption and display that style object without changing cars, which is our data frame. But sometimes we actually do need to change the table, especially if we want to change the column names. So here, instead of starting with styler, I actually make a copy of just the data I want to show, only the columns I want to show, and then I format them using the styler object. All right, in this next section, we are going to make some bar charts, which are also car charts. And let me just show you what I'm talking about. Here we go. This is a quick bar chart showing top 10 car-free counties in New York State. Put a space in there, right? And all we're doing is taking cars, taking the head. It's already sorted. I don't need to resort it. And that's one thing to keep in mind. We don't want to add a lot of code that we've already run. Like our notebook should flow together where each new code block is just what we're adding to it, and it's a progression from the top. Right? So we get the top 10 columns, and just in one line of code, we can make this bar chart we call px.bar. We pass in the first thing, the data we want. The x value is the column that we want to use for the x-axis going this way. And then y is the column we want to use for the y-axis going this way, right? So we have the top 10 counties from Broome County to New York County showing the number of cars. And you can see this is interactive. When we mouse over it, we get a little bit of additional data. All right. So one line of code, we get a quick bar chart, helps us to understand and visualize our data. But now I'm going to show you with a few more lines of code, we can actually make a nicer bar chart. So let me scroll all the way down just to so you have in mind where we're headed. This is cars owned by New York City Borough. So households and the number of vehicles available per household. And you can see 0 cars is blue, 1 car is this orangish red, and so on. And we can get a quick sense. So here we see Manhattan, Brooklyn. They have the largest raw numbers of households with no car. And then you can see a comparison of in Queens, you can see no car and own a car are roughly equivalent. Staten Island, 1 car is the most populous bar in our bar chart, and so on. So this is what we want to do. And to get here, first thing we're going to do is get exactly the data we want in a table and use that data set to make the bars, right? So we do a little bit of work, and I'm going to step through it. First thing we do is get just the counties in New York, right? So this is, we have all the counties, and we're going to filter that down to just the New York City counties. So here, this is what we already did before when we joined the New York State counties in, but now we're going to join the New York City counties, right? So this is all of New York State in this part of the clause, and we want to make sure the name of the county is in Bronx, Kings, New York, Queens, or Richmond, right? So these are the 5 counties in New York City. And now I know the New York City counties, and then I'm going to merge New York City counties in with my data. And this, I do the left on, right on syntax, so you can see both ways to do it. I merge them on the county, and I'm going to do an inner join. So that means I only get exact matches. I'm only going to have New York City counties when I'm done. So I call this new data frame New York City cars, right? Okay. So the next thing I want to do is actually get the boroughs. These, I don't want to use counties. That's not how people think of New York. They think of it as borough. So I create a little dictionary here called boroughs, and I just use the simple spelling. And I'm going to just map that to the name column. So the name column in my data is the county name, and I'm going to take that and map boroughs. So I don't need to do apply when it's simply like a lookup, right? So we could also do apply and use a function or a lambda function to look into our dictionary, but we don't have to. We can just pass in this dictionary, use it as a map, and we create this new column called boroughs, right? And then for each category in my chart, 0 cars, 1 car, 2 cars, and so on, I'm going to sum up the owner-occupied and the renter-occupied houses into a single unit. And let me just fix this problem here. These should all be plus signs. There we go. So this is the sum of both of these, right? And let me run that. Okay. And then I'm going to make a list that just has the column names that I want to use in for the bars, right? And they're these columns, right? And then the columns I want are these columns plus borough. So this syntax, when I add 2 lists together, it makes 1 list. So I'm going to add boroughs, and I just put the column name inside of square brackets to turn it into a Python list so that I can add it to my columns here. And then I get those into New York City cars. So here on line 21, we're taking a sub-selection of columns and putting that back into the same data frame. I'm dropping all the other columns that we don't need. All right. So here we're going to do a little bit of basic Python. I create an empty style that I'm going to use as the format for this table. And I'm basically going to format all of these columns using this function. And I also want to convert them to integers. So here's what we do. For every column C in the columns list, run these 2 lines of code. First, we convert that column to an int, right? Then I push a new style with that column name into this empty styles dictionary. So if we want, I could do display styles, and you can see that we go from an empty dictionary to a dictionary that has 1 entry, 1 key for each of our column names that we want to style, and then it's got the format string for it, right? Okay. So then, like we did before, I use a style object to format my table. I set a caption on it, and it just returns the table with that caption. And we show the table. And this is how we want to display our bar graph. All right. For the bar chart, just going to save my title into a variable here. Make it easier to change. I don't need to go back and read the function call. So I create the title. I'm just showing you I could put a little bit of HTML in here. You can put whatever you want, I think. If you're familiar with HTML, we could say we want the color to be blue, right? So any HTML we want, we can use that to style this output. And again, like we did above, I'm going to call the bar function in Plotly Express. The data we want is New York City cars, so I'm giving it just the data I want. I don't need to do a subselection of columns or anything. And the x-axis is going to be the borough column. So that's going along the x-axis. It's going to be in the same order that my data is here. So if I want to sort it differently, I should sort it first. The y-axis are going to be cols. So I'm passing in a variable with the column names. Remember, cols is all of the columns except for borough. Now the labels, this is to make a nicer display. They show up here in the legend. So this is the variable becomes vehicles available, and the mouse overs, you can see the value is going to be that column name. Right? So here we go. The title is the title. Now I want to convert this to vertical. So I say, well, and I want it to be grouped. So I say bar mode group. And then this is just a label for the x-axis. And I say tick marks, use the comma, and that just separates these values with commas. So it makes it easier to read. Now, it's only 2 calls, and we get a nice interactive chart where you can mouse over and get detailed view. And then up here we have this tool panel. So if we just wanted to like zoom in a little bit, we can do that. So I'm looking at Staten Island, and I can see like how many people actually have 4 cars or even 5 cars in Staten Island. And if we want to, we can just reset it and go back, and we can see the same thing. Like there's so few 4 and 5 family cars, it's very hard to read, but there are some in Brooklyn. There are, almost 3,000 4-car households, and I think I need to zoom to get in there for that one to see how many 5s. Yeah, there we go. So in Brooklyn, 3 million people, there are 13 or 1,400 households that have 5 or more cars. So very, very small percentage of the population in Brooklyn. All right, that's it for this video. In this video, we learned how to make style tables using the style object, some techniques for making style tables using just a subset of data, so copying our main data so we don't have to change it, and then style it, rename column names. We did a little practice merging in some geodata with our other data so we could use the names. And then we introduced this Plotly Express to make some bar charts. All right, good luck and enjoy.